Let's compare the brand new Reptile 3D embossing folder from Sizzix with the Cobblestone embossing folder from Sizzix. They have both a very similar look to them. Reptile's a little bit more small for sure, but they create a really cool look with them. If you've never used 3D embossing folders before, I'm using some mixed media cardstock. I like to mist my cardstock lightly on both sides before putting it in the embossing folder, and I'm using my Big Shot machine to put it through. I have the top tab open of my multi-purpose platform and one cutting plate, and you'll see that because I misted the paper, it just goes into all those nooks and crannies of that embossing folder. I'm going to do the same thing for the Reptile one, and I'm not sure if it's because this is a brand new folder or not, but it just didn't want to go through with the same sandwich, so I opened up the next tab and it went through beautifully. I've never had this happen before with 3D embossing folders, but if you notice it happening with yours, just make sure you don't force it in. We don't want to ruin our machines trying to get some beautiful texture. Because I misted them with water, I'm going to let that completely dry before I add some ink to it. You could leave them on their own. You don't need to add ink to it. One way to do it if you wanted to add ink is use a brayer like I'm doing right here. I'm going to do distress ink on one side, and I'm going to do oxide on the other embossed background, just so you can see the difference. You can get different looks depending on what mediums you use. And I'm using ink pads here, but you could even use sprays. You could use embossing powder. There's a lot of different ways. You could also put the ink on with a blending brush or even straight from the pad. On the oxide, I'm doing the same thing. First, I'm using a brayer, then I will use an ink blending brush. Make sure you don't use the same ink blending brush with your oxides that you do with your dye. You don't want to cross-contaminate them. But this is a great way just to add some extra color and texture to your backgrounds. And like I said, you don't have to. You can do whatever you want with them. But it's nice to be able to enhance them a little bit more than just having them plain. So after I've added the ink, I'm going to mist with water just because I'd like the way these ink pads blend and bleed. And as they're dry, you can see how cool they look. And this would make just a really cool reptile background. Both of them would, but both completely different looks.